So the first thing to look at is what factors need to be considered when deciding whether. So this one is what factors need to be considered when deciding whether to parent or not. Financial cost is going to be the most important thing. Honestly, in older days, people used to use kids as like a workforce, while obviously raising them, but helping them because most people lived on farms or in, rural areas. America wasn't as developed, and the world wasn't as developed back then. And so people used children as a means of an economic advantage, and that's not how it is anymore. In our book on page 195, a 2013 study shows that the average cost of raising a child for a middle-class family from birth to 18 was $245,000 total, and it did not include college costs, child care costs if the parents were working, and especially nowadays we're seeing that kids are staying with their parents longer. 18 isn't necessarily the age that they move out. So it's going to be very expensive to have a kid, so that's something that needs to be taken into account. Also, that the relationship dynamic between the parents might change. So possible marital happiness or spousal happiness will change because your focus is no longer your spouse or your mate, it is your child. And then that also has to deal with even two parents who have a kid who are no longer together. Your personal happiness may be altered, especially if there's a bad relationship with that parent that you're trying to co-parent with. And then something that's not really talked about, but that's extremely important, is that there is someone depending on you for everything. You are, their emotional support. You're their financial support. You're helping to raise this child, to instill values in them. And that's really hard for some people to deal with someone needing them for everything. So that's also something that you have to think about. And then also a loss of personal gain. So whether that means having to put your interests on hold. You can't just say, oh, I want to go on a vacation next month and just plan it. You have to plan it around your child and their school or their extracurricular activities and things like that. Having to put your own education or your own goals on hold in order to help properly take care of your kid. And then also career advancement or employment. Sometimes people have to take a specific job because they need certain hours that they can work but still be there for their kid. And then also in regards to career advancement, you're not able to put in the same amount of time as somebody else who does not have kids and does not have that obligation. And it's almost like you have to choose between, that work-life balance and that career advancement, because some people are technically able to outwork you, or at least seem that way, because you have to balance taking care of a child as well. You also have to think if you and your spouse are ready to be good parents. So in a study that Simon, Beeman, Conger, and Chow did in 1993, it said that studies have provided strong evidence of a relationship between emotional well-being and quality of parenting. So if you yourself are not in a good emotional space, let's say postpartum depression, or maybe you're just struggling with some sort of regular depression or addiction or, any sort of thing that you're not able to fully be present and in the moment and have a good mental health, then the quality of your parenting is also going to change due to that. And then the study also found that parental satisfaction with the child's behavior was related to the quality of parenting received as children. So not only is it about your mental health and your well-being, something that you need to think about when you're going to have a child, but also how did your childhood and your upbringing affect the way that you are now parenting your child? So with that present study, I put the quote here, your ability to parent. The present study indicated that parents are less supporting and engage in harsher discipline when they are dissatisfied with their child's behavior. It also stated that dissatisfaction with the child was associated with the parent's emotional state. So if you're not in a good emotional space, you're more likely to not think things through, to not give, fair or equal discipline to your child. So that's also something to take into account when you think about wanting to be a parent or not. But our book did tell us that there are, benefits. A lot of people find that parenting is the most important job in the world to them. Our book on page 194 said becoming a parent can certify one's attainment of adulthood. And it's an extremely meaningful aspect of their personal identity. So changes in parenting trends, I had a quote here from our book. The total fertility rate changed from 3.5 in 1950s to 1.9 currently. So we're actually lower in the amount of kids that we are having. And this is probably based upon the economic prices, meaning that conception is kind of based on economics because people are having to decide whether or not the cost of having a baby is worth it. And 2 children is the new ideal household size. It was bigger, but now larger families are frowned upon. And then also women are obtaining higher education and full-time work. So that kind of plays a role on the family size and the time to be able to take care of a kid. And we also know that women are waiting longer to have babies. So there's going to be a lower number of kids. For example, on page 199, a study found that one-child families have raised by 20%. Also, the birth rate, as I said, is the age of women, having a baby has raised. So the birth to women in their 20s constitute almost a half of the birth, and that it's in their late 20s, and that in relation to that, teen births have actually declined. The birth rate of women in their 30s and 40s is also actually rising because, again, women are waiting to have babies later on in life. And then another change in trend is with couples who have higher education or income. They're starting to have fewer children because they know that children cost opportunity, like what I was talking about before with career advancement or education or hobbies. And then ethnicity and money also play a role in whether or not someone has a kid. Again, whether or not you can financially afford it. Ethnicity in regards to what ethnicities usually have more kids. Also, whether or not a pregnancy is planned. Our book said that half of pregnancies for women in the United States is unplanned. And then also that couples are marrying later on in life, which means that they have the freedom to be able to experience different things and then maybe decide that they don't want kids. And then last is the rise in feminism, that more women are feeling empowered to reach their goals, to worry about work and school than having a child, than just, being the typical housewife that people portray. Now, these are the advantages I thought of regarding parenting in the 21st century, is the ability to actually have a kid, that you're able to, if you decide and you're having trouble having a kid, you can do, in vitro, you can get fertility treatments and things like that to help you have a baby, and that there's better hospital care now than it was, say in the 1950s and things like that, where women are able to more successfully give birth and have children, that there's more support groups for parents in regards to doing like meetups, and there's different apps and things like that for parents and for support with postpartum depression and those things. There's more resources from the government compared to earlier years in regards to money and different opportunities for especially single mothers. The ability to Google or go on apps when you have parenting questions. There's a lot of technological advances and resources. Dealing with a family member that's away, so maybe someone is working, farther away, that you could use FaceTime and Skype for that. Technology also provides a big distraction for kids. We know kids have iPads, laptops, watching TV and things like that. So that helps. And then also the ability to find childcare and babysitting. Now, the disadvantages of parenting in the 21st century, most parents have to work, and they have to work a lot in order to afford a kid. So the work and parent life balance is going to be different. And a lot of companies want you to put work first, but you can't really do that with a child. Another thing would be the conflicting values and points of view between parents and society, like our book mentioned on page 219. An example of that now would be like teaching sexuality and, transgender and gays and things like that in schools. That's starting to be implemented in the lesson plans and things like that, but that might not necessarily be something that a parent wants to teach their child. And then also having less support for raising a child. So less flexibility of childcare hours to be able to have programs for your kids, publicly funded programs too. The parent's ability to raise a child as well. So the social, economical, cultural influences on a child and also the parents. So example, minority kids who have to stay in the streets longer, they tend to get in more trouble, but most of the time those parents are working. It's also harder to, just let your child be in the street and play and be a kid because we've lost a sense of community. And that also has to do with the technology that kids are on and them being exposed to other things. And then the also non-standard working time. So a study from Melanin, Savan, Metsapilo, and May in 2017 talks about non-standard working times and that the patterns may affect parents or moderate the link between non-standard working time and parenting, so that non-standard full-time working in particular seem to interfere with developing enriching parenting practices. So because parents have to work more now, for example, overnights, extended days, that work affects their ability to be an active and present parent with their child. And that's also a parenting challenge. And this is just my reference page, so that way you can see the two studies that I got my information from, and then also our book.